Okay, so let's take a look. Now, both of these, this response motion is like, I don't know. Let me take a look. I forget. It's 25 pages long. We're not reading this whole thing. A lot of this has to do with political stuff that I'm not all that interested in. It's just the defense raising every possible defense and argument they can for their client, and the prosecution, waving a bunch of stuff away. But the key issue, the key question I wanted to touch on here was this question of how can you keep charging Hannah Gutierrez-Reed if you're not charging Alec Baldwin? And this is the way the prosecution addressed that particular issue. Let's see. The charges against Alec Baldwin were dismissed without prejudice. So in April, they dropped the involuntary manslaughter charge against Alec Baldwin, but without prejudice. With prejudice means they're gone forever. They can never come back. Without prejudice means, no, we can change our minds. They were dismissed without prejudice because a possible malfunction of the gun significantly affects causation with regard to Baldwin, but not with regard to Gutierrez. So what they're saying here is Baldwin's prospective liability is recklessness in the handling of the gun. That his handling of the gun was done in such a way that it didn't create a substantial unjustified risk of death. Now, what they're referring to is Alec Baldwin's claim that he never touched the trigger. If it was, in fact, a defect in the gun, they're arguing that the gun fired itself, then it's true that Alec Baldwin didn't touch the trigger, and that breaks the causation of his liability. Now, I think that's a BS argument, because I think merely pointing the gun at another person, right, is sufficient to create a substantial unjustified risk of death. That's why we don't do it. We don't pick up a gun, not ensure it's unloaded, and point it at our own head. I mean, I wouldn't do that even if I had ensured it was unloaded. But certainly, until we've ensured it's unloaded, we know it's capable of inflicting death, potentially capable of inflicting death. So the mere pointing of the gun without ensuring it's unloaded creates a substantial and unjustified risk of death. To me, the pressing of the trigger is just a bonus. Here, the prosecution seems to be buying into this notion that, well, you have to have the trigger press. I don't think that's true. But even if you believe it's true, so if you assume you have to have the trigger press for liability, they're saying here, well, we have reason to believe there may have been a defect in the gun, and therefore a trigger press was not required. So maybe he didn't press the trigger and didn't cause the shot to fire. The prosecution continues, if it's determined that the gun did not malfunction, that it did require a trigger press to fire the gun, charges against Mr. Baldwin will proceed. So if it was not a malfunction, we're going to bring charges again. The prosecution, it continues, anticipates making a final charging decision with regard to Mr. Baldwin within the next 60 days. Well, I have to point this out. This was filed with the court on June 9th, 2023. June 9th, July 9th, August 9th, that's 60 days. It's now August 25th. And the prosecutor's office has made no court filing or other formal declaration, even in the media, that I can find about a final charging decision with respect to Mr. Baldwin. In any case, the evidence overwhelmingly supports the notion that Alec Baldwin did press the trigger. Now, Alec Baldwin has excellent attorneys working in his behalf. And one of the things they're making a big deal out of is that this revolver was sent to the FBI for testing. And it's very common in where someone's claiming a shooting was unintentional, a shooting death was unintentional. The gun just went off. They always say that. The gun just went off. I don't know what happened. That they'll test the gun. They'll put like a blank or a primer only cartridge in the gun. And then they'll start whacking the gun with a rubber mallet. And what they're trying to do is see if the gun can go off from some impact other than a pressing of the trigger. And the FBI was doing this, very standard kind of examination. And they did it enough that they actually broke the sear of the pistol, the part of the pistol that would release the hammer to discharge the gun. But the gun never fired, even up to the point of an impact strong enough to break the sear, the gun still never discharged. So all their testing is consistent with, no, the gun couldn't fire itself, meaning the trigger would still have to be pressed. But Alec Baldwin's lawyers are saying, no, look, the gun was defective. It's broken. Well, of course, it was broken in the course of the testing. It wasn't broken when it was in Alec Baldwin's hands.